Good morning, people. Sorry, I'm going to probably be looking down at my phone a bunch. I apologize in advance about that. How many do we have? Six so far. All right. And I am on screen. Good. Yeah, my camera was having issues earlier. Hello. I'll give people some time to filter in. How are we this fine morning? It's actually sunny out, which is kind of nice. Kind of need a nice sunny day. Yeah, it's like a sign that, winter does have an end, which is a comforting thought. Okay, where is everybody? Get online, people. Okay, so still 6. There's like 3 times 6 in this class. Weird. Let me look something up real quick. Well. Alright, well, I'm just going to get started, and if only 6 of you get this, real A+ material here, then gosh darn it, 6 of you will get the A+ material. Because we're talking about a topic today that is very near and dear to my own heart, which is level design. So, if you're not familiar, I used to be kind of shy about this, but I also think that I've come to realize it is actually good for professors to share what they do with their students in terms of work, simply from the point of view of it's not like students usually look up what instructors do. We're just your teachers to you. But in fact, we have rich professional lives, or at least I hope we do, because that helps us be people who can teach you. So one of the things that I've done is this, which is to write this book on level design, which people seem to like. I'm just going to throw that out there. People seem to be very happy with it. So, why I bring this up is to just give you an update of, tell you that, there are some topics where I will absolutely cop to, hey, I have, a high-level academic knowledge of something. I've admitted to that with narrative design, because there are people whose whole job is narrative design. That is what they get paid to do, and I am not one of those people. However, I can say with pretty decent certainty that I know a thing or 3 about level design, because I've done level design. I've done lots of level design, and my background is in a field that plugs really well into level design. So let's talk about level design today. First of all, we need to figure out what is level design and clarify some things, because one of the things that I think happens with new young game designers is that they will get the concept of what is level design exactly a little mixed up, and that's okay. You're new. That's why you're here to learn, because if you knew everything, then what would you need to learn from? So, first of all, with level design, we need to figure out like what is it and what is it not. So a lot of young designers might think like, well, is level design, doing concepts and pictures and textures and environment art and 3D models and stuff like that? No, but also kind of a bit maybe sometimes, but usually no. Likewise, a lot of people will be like, well, I'm going to make some levels. I'm going to put as much stuff in the player's way as humanly possible, and that's going to like create challenge and stuff like that. And, well, that's a thing you can do, but and some types of levels like really support that. Sometimes they are really sometimes, sorry, I'm getting like messages about things. Also, so just FYI, today we launched the Nemo Kickstarter. So like, if anybody has any questions on like what it's like to do that and what that experience is like, just pop the questions in the chat. So yeah, like when you're designing levels, some people will be like, well, I wanna make it as hard as possible because that's hard is good, right? And sometimes depends on what you're making. You're hearing like a lot of me say depends on what you're making. So what does this all mean? Like all this depends on what you're making. Well, let's look at some perspectives. Here's Jay Wilbur from Epic Games. And he says, level design is where the rubber hits the road. Okay, neat. No doubt. All right, but that's kind of general. But maybe it says some things. Let's look at what John Romero has to say. I forgot my Cacodemon again. I have a Cacodemon that I like to have so that me and John can both have Cacodemons. So John Romero, famous level designer, says level design is largely responsible for the implementation of gameplay in a title. Well, that's kind of cool. So what do you think? What is your perspective on level design? What do you think it is? And what do you think the work of a level designer looks like? You. Okay, nice. Have the level connect to the mechanics of the game. Man, spoiler alerts. Maybe flowcharts for planning. Man, you've all been listening to me too much. Yes, all these things. See, it's funny. I always go in like, let me address all the misconceptions of level design, and you apparently have none. Got a bunch of ringers here. So yeah, really great responses. Me, sure, yeah. Have the level connect to the mechanics of the game. Yes. Flowcharts for planning out paths within the level sometimes. Yes. Putting together a sandbox for the player to play in. Can be. It might even like kind of depend on how you define sandbox. Because there are games that are sandbox levels, and there are also like just emergence in games, which can be kind of sandboxy. So that's cool. A level designer is a person who lays out the basis for what a level will play like. Yes, important. Play is really important. Level designer creates spaces to give the mechanic. I like that. Room to operate. Ooh, that's good. I love that. Level design is the game's environment, but it's meant to raise the gameplay to new heights. Every level must always have death pits. That's actually my go-to when I talk to people who are involved with level design and architecture, because like I get to use lava and zombies and you don't, and it's freeing. So let's look at level design, and you all kind of touch on this concept. Level design, the sort of academic-ish, definition that I've given is the thoughtful execution of gameplay into game space for players to dwell in. And sorry, I'm watering a plant that I just realized is thirsty. So what does that mean? Well, think about it this way. We're creating, as level designers, we're using technological tools to create these worlds, these environments for our game characters to inhabit, and by extension, our players to. It's and this gets into the Jay Wilbur thing. You are the front line. You are. You're almost user experience designer, but you're not doing. Not that user experience designers specifically always work just on user interfaces, but like the level is this weird extension of the user interface where it is like the thing that the camera on the game character is looking at, right? It is what is in front of the player in their experience of interacting with your game. So that's really important. So there's that element of it. So yeah, it's tied to mechanics, so gameplay into game space. But then there's this idea of dwelling. And this is like admittedly me really pushing an architectural point of view, because dwelling is this sort of like loaded term in architecture that encompasses like what's it like to be in a place and meaningfully use a place. So, I'm sure some of you might have had this experience in your life, the idea that like, your dorm room or your apartment or wherever is just kind of like a place where you end up sleeping. Like you go and you live your life and then you go home and just like crash and then get up the next day and leave. There's times in our lives when we experience that. So that's not really like you're not dwelling in that space versus, is there a space that you feel a close attachment to? And maybe it enfolds part of your life experience. So, it's the sort of like difference between a house and a home. But also the idea of like if you've ever been to a place that seems designed to be a nice place to be, which sounds very fluffy and poetic, but I do have a master's in architecture, and that's what engineers tell me I am. So, think about like it is about this human lived experience more than just, like playing the game. And this goes into like action games, exploration games, Metroidvanias, anything. You want to have like a meaningful experience in a level. So it should like execute the gameplay well, and give the player some like good experience. So level design is, I also like to say, it's the primary means of communicating with your player, because this is again like your front line. Real life video game level 1, bedroom dead pits. If you someday when you have children and those children have Legos, yes. So let's look at this. And I have some of these slides to address misconceptions, but you are all actually not having some. But I'm still going to talk about this. One thing that a lot of people like new to level design might think is, okay, well, I've literally met people who are like, I learned Unreal, I'm a level designer now. Okay, sure, maybe. But you know, so a lot of new people will just look at it like this. But let me hit you with this. Level designers, first of all, they often don't work in environment art. So, again, a tendency that I see a lot with younger level designers is that they will just go in and they'll take, a bunch of asset packs in whatever engine they're in, Unity, Unreal, whatever, and they'll just like start dropping in the nice assets. Now, why is that a bad idea? Well, it gets hairy because what you do is that, let's say I'm in Unity and I literally have several packs like this, an asset pack of like buildings, right? Like I have several asset packs that are just tons and tons and tons of buildings, like just tiles of like corner, window, and you just like build them like Legos. So let's say I say I'm going to do some level design and I start bringing those in and I start building my buildings. If I test my level with a player and I discover that building's placement sucks and it's making the level be unpleasant in some way, what ends up happening is that game player now is now they're looking at the game player is like having a bad time, and then if I need to change something, I have to go and select each and every single one of those building tiles from that building. So let's say it's 100 some in my scene to delete them, and that can get very, very time intensive and costly. So first things first, what happens is that level designers often, they are working on levels in high-level experiential ways, which means they're going to do what's called gray boxing, which is where you take default engine brushes like BSP geometry and you just kind of like make big hunks. So instead of with a level, me making like a building out of lots of little building tiles that look very nice, I just make like a big like brush block and just go and then pop it in. And what that does is it creates the mass of that feature, but I can like, if I discover that it's blocking a certain key path or something, or a view or something like that in my game, I can then be like, oh, okay, no big deal. Move, like click move or click delete. You only do that once. It saves lots of time. It allows iteration. It's prototyping, people. And if you're interested in becoming a level designer, I would encourage you when October comes again, to follow the hashtag Blocktober on Twitter. I think it might also be on Instagram too. And it involves a lot of studios just like sharing stuff like this. Like, this is what our levels looked like before they were nice. But you can really see the aspects of a gray box. You have very generalized geometry, some color coding. So, water is blue, vegetation is green, that's doing certain things. You have some basic lighting, but not nice lighting, and you have like your character maybe running around in it. And keep in mind, these teams are big, so if you're working on a small team, it's okay to have a character that's like a capsule, or whatever the like default character, like the Unreal robot guy, right? It's okay. You don't have to have nice Nathan Drake here, because they're working at a studio where somebody else is making Nathan Drake, not you. And again, like when you're level designing, it's about trying things out. It's about experimentation. So if we look at this gray box from God of War, we see, you've got like earlier version of Kratos, and we're looking at the gray box of that one area where you're next to the dead giant and you have to like move his ring to line up the red stone to make it go boom and destroy an ice wall. And if you're trying to figure out a puzzle like that, you can make puzzles out of simplified geometry that is color-coded so that you can be like red explode, hit red things to explode. The gold things will be the part of the ring that you can like push and manipulate. You can color code boy. Yes, exactly. Such a good game. Oh my god, so good. Such a good game. It's one of those like games that is so good. It's just like brings warmth to my heart, like Breath of the Wild. I was like literally moved by the beauty of the world of Breath of the Wild. Kind of the same way with God of War, which I need to get back to. So, level design, professional level designers are thinking about these things. And what they want to do, because they are working in these like high-level BSP things, they're thinking about, how do my users use my level? Can I create these nice experiences? I almost said immersive, but that's a dirty word. Don't ever say immersive. It's a bad word. It's a gross word. So many reasons. So I don't know. What do you think about that? What do you think about, I guess, I don't know. Ask me 2 questions. We'll do the questions thing. Why is immersion bad? Okay. I might need to take this phone call. Hold on. Hello? It is. Yeah, it was already done. Yep. Bye-bye. Sorry, I got a phone call from New Philly, which is where my office is. So I was like, oh no, what's going on? But it was not, it was something else, which was okay. It's very benevolent. So immersion itself is not bad. I think it's kind of like fun, where there is it's this overloaded term that you need to be careful with when you're talking, I guess, among designers, because it is like a nice marketing term, and you see it used a lot among marketers and a lot among game academics, but it is a very top-down concept. So first of all, it really what it is that it suffers from like buzzwordiness to the point where it's almost not useful as a thing we can talk about, like, again, fun. I even like another good example, and this might be a little more esoteric than even you're aware of, but like, in design studies, there's a concept called like design thinking, which that I really love. Like my instructors used when I was in college, and it meant this very beautiful thing, which was, it's actually in my other level design slideshow for this later in the semester. And what it means is like, basically kind of seeing design as this ability to blend inputs from multiple places and influence from multiple places and things like that. Anyway, but it was picked up as a buzzword by this research group and sort of commodified, and then when something's commodified, it gets kind of icky, because you're just tired of hearing it. Like gamification, it's bad. Of course, sign up for Games for Education to hear Chris's gamification rant. So immersion itself is not bad. If you have taken Games for Education and you do have the book Rules of Play, you might be familiar with a concept called the immersive fallacy, which is this idea that, if we think about true immersion, it means that you sort of like discount the world around you, perhaps even like your own personal experiences and identity coming into it. And that, again, that's an academic thing, but there's a fallacy of immersion where they're saying, well, like, you exist in the real world. Like, if I punch you in the side of the head when you're playing a VR game, you're still going to feel like you got punched. You know, you're going to get out of the VR experience real quick, right? So that's why immersion is a weird term, because it's taken on this meaning that is like kind of hard to totally 100% buy. You know, your game can certainly have like catch attention and hold attention, but I think like hold attention is a really more interesting metric than like immersion, for that reason. So it's one of those, like, you know, and you'll see this when you're professionals, like, you know, if you ever do graphic design, it's like you'll never say something pops. I feel terrible every time I say something like that. Close. So yeah, that's why it can be a dicey terminology. That was a great question. So I'm going to move on. So in architecture, there is this concept called the Vitruvian triad, and it was created by the Roman architect Vitruvius, who was alive during the 1st century BCE. And it's not something that is like going to be something that architects use in a day-to-day fashion. That's not its point. Its point is that it's this like high-level idea to talk to people about like the way buildings should operate. And again, so this is just like high level. It's theoretical, but it's useful as a mindset. You know, we had a discussion on Twitter a few days ago where somebody was like, "But I can't use this in my day-to-day job," and we're like, "Yeah, duh. Why are you trying?" It's just a way to, you know, illustrate a point. So, you know, buildings need firmitas or firmness, which is they need to stand up. Utilitas or commodity, so it needs to have like function. It needs to like be for the use it is for. So, you know, if it's a house, it should function like a house. If it's a church, it should function like a church. If it's a factory, it should function like a factory. If it's a museum, you know, you get it. And then there's Venustas, delight, which is like beauty. It's this otherness. This like ethereal ideal of having something that is like pleasing to the soul, more so than just like being functional and things like that. So if we think about level design, and I really like this idea for level design, because this is a way to start talking about like, well, where are the ways that we can think about levels, you know, treating the player in certain ways. So maybe like levels, you know, of course have functional requirements. Like it has to work, it has to be functional inside the game engine. I'm going to go back. You know, it should not have bugs. It should, you know, the collider should work. It shouldn't stop you. It shouldn't stop your progress in annoying ways. It shouldn't. I was listening to a gaming podcast where they were criticizing the structure of a game as having like lockouts, where, you know, there's like a mini quest to collect X amount of widgets, and if you progress at a certain point in the game without collecting all the widgets till that point, you can't go back and get the widgets. So it's like, well, what's the point of this quest? That's a terrible structure. So, you know, it should function, and it should like function well, you know. So of course, you know, it should be free of bugs and a good piece of technology. But if that's all levels were, like a procedurally generated maze with one texture would be fine. But it's not fine. It's hard to navigate structures like that. If you know, you just have a computer generate a maze of walls that all look the same, that's not really a usable level. That's not some place that's interesting to navigate. It's just sort of like you get disoriented by it. So there should be usability, meaning that there should be some aspect of the environment should be structured in such a way that you can like navigate and know where you are at a given point. So are there landmarks? Are there what are called architectural weenies, which is a nice way of saying landmark, which is that, you know, it's a structure that stands out and calls to the player's attention so that they might go to it. If you've ever been to Disney World or Disneyland, you know, the castle, Splash Mountain, the big geodesic dome in Epcot Center, those are all weenies. They're all like iconic structures that you can be like, oh, I'm in this part of the park because I'm at this point in relation to Cinderella's castle. Incidentally, the KSU library also functions in that way. So, you know, that's just one example of like ways that it should be navigable. But then there's this other idea of delight. You know, so okay, let's say you add some architectural weenies to your weird maze. That maybe makes it a little bit better. You can move around it, but maybe it's just still not good. So how do you add something that will, you know, get the player to feel really cool about being in your level? Like, is there an opportunity for players to like, are there surprises? Are there moments of satisfaction? Are there rewards, you know, where it feels rewarding to be in your level? You know, that's where you start to get into this human experience part of playing a game, and that's really important. That's your delight, and that's how you know you want to strive for that as a level designer. So, can you think? So here's another give me two or ask me two. Can you think about levels in game, like a specific level or a specific game that had level design where either they did not have all of these aspects, and what was that like? Or can you think about a level in a game that absolutely did have those aspects and you were like, wow, that was a super satisfying sequence, and why? You know, why was it unsatisfying or satisfying? I want you to think about these, like, you know, were you ever lost? Were you ever you know, did you ever have difficulty with a game like that? All right. So now you're just pandering. Super Metroid is a good example of level design. Yes. I love Super Metroid so much. That's a game that I think gets popped into my Super Nintendo like once a year-ish, in which, even though it's non-linear in progress, players should not feel lost due to rooms being different enough so as not to look similar. Yeah, Super Metroid is a really excellent textbook example of level design. I could probably teach an entire course using Super Metroid as a textbook, where it has a number of really interesting pacing aspects. It loops onto itself in really meaningful and satisfying ways. It has all these little moments like power bombing the glass hallway, which is a lot of fun. That give it it makes it very, very satisfying to navigate. But it also does really cool things. Like, and again, this is let's delve deep into the aspects of delight. You know, when you get so if you've never played Super Metroid, you should try to find a way to play Super Metroid. If you have a Nintendo Switch, I believe it's on the virtual, you know, whatever they call the stand-in for the virtual console. But what's really cool about that is that you get this experience of, like, when you go into a room and you get the item in the room, you then have to use that item to get out of the room. It's designed in such a way that, like, you have a one-way pathway until you get the item, then your pathway's opened up again. And that's really good because what that does is that puts what's called a skill gate in your way, and skill gates are one way to teach players mechanics. And again, so that's just like your usability, your delight, because then you feel more powerful and happy. I always find it satisfying when a level loops back on itself unexpectedly and you find yourself in a new part of a previous area suddenly. I like that too. I know a lot of people that are like, that's a little on the nose, but I actually really appreciate it because it's like, oh good, I don't have to backtrack. If you can do it elegantly, I think it works. Games like Legend of Dragoon, Or Chrono Cross sometimes had problems with confusing levels, but it was mostly due to the art style and overcrowded areas. Actually, don't discount that, though, because art style is a big part of this. I called out, making a maze out of walls that all have the same texture. Repetition and pancaking, taking like floor, copy, paste. Doing that, there's a production reality to it that some people would be like, but I made production so fast. But everybody hates the library in Halo, and the devs know that. That's why all the achievements associated with the library are almost mocking you for hating it, because they know it's bad. Any bad NES level here? I just called out a Xbox level. But you're right. Like, there's a lot of those on the NES because there wasn't this notion of level design as like an art. You can kind of tell. So there's, I don't want to get in the weeds. I'm going to get a little in the weeds. Aladdin, the video game. There are two. There's one on Super Nintendo and one on Sega. And if you have opinions on this, you all might be too young to have opinions on this, but if you do, then you're a retro gamer, yay. But like, they actually, so the Super Nintendo one was developed by Capcom. Actually, the director on it was Shinji Mikami, who you might recognize from Resident Evil, and the one on Sega was published by Virgin, and is very European in style. And what's interesting about those two games contrasting each other is that one is Japanese level design, the other one is European platformer level design, which some people refer to as warehouse level design, where it's just like, here's a big space and a bunch of platforms, and there's a goal somewhere, go. Whereas, Japanese level design is this very orchestrated series of challenges that might be more linear, but also has more like composition to it. And people get into it over which one is the better Aladdin, and the Sega fans have like, but our animation was done by the Disney animators, and the Super Nintendo people have, but level design. I'm a Super Nintendo kid, but I also happen to like the Japanese style level design better, so that's where I stand on it. The graphics were cool on Aladdin, but bleh. So yeah, part of it is like art style, overcrowding. So overcrowding is interesting because it's like, is it too small to maneuver? That's a little more advanced. That's in the next lecture, but yes, like room to maneuver. Actually, no, that's not advanced. That's metrics. We'll get to that in a second. Last levels of Half-Life 2 had you fighting up to the Citadel, in which is in some way visible in the skybox. Yes, the Citadel in Half-Life 2. Yes. The constant reminder of where you are in the game and what your progress is. Beautiful. I love the Citadel. And the Citadel, especially also once you get to it, you notice it's all vertical lines. So when you look down the pit, I've actually, the one of the art directors at Valve told me this. When you're looking at that Citadel and you look down the pit, the linear elements of the Citadel go in perspective and create a convergence which draws your eye, but also gives you a vertigo sense. That's one way where environment art and level design are working together. Labyrinth Zone from Sonic 1. Yeah, it's annoying. Yep. Sonic 1's level design is kind of goofy, and actually that's a good example of why. Let's get to the next thing, and then we'll talk about that part of Sonic 1. So planning. Let's talk about level design process. So level design process starts with planning, and like I've said before, don't acknowledge the role that planning plays in these design processes. It's really important. There's the old saying like months of coding will save you hours of planning, and what that means is basically like, you could just hammer away at working, but you could start right away, but you're just kind of flailing in the air. If you have a plan, you kind of have a set of goals to know what you're about to accomplish. So yesterday I showed off this Team Nemo. we're going to go on to my... Sorry, I should have preloaded this before the lecture. I apologize. I'm going to log into our wiki. And for my current project. And what I want you to get a sense of from this wiki is that what planning looks like in level design, or what it can look like. So I'm occasionally asked by students nowadays, like, hey, how do we do game design documents? And the reason I don't explicitly teach game design documents is that there are, so first of all, if you're not familiar, game design document is a spec document that is sort of the like binder of everything you need to know to make the game you want to make. So it's a living document created by game developers to be the thing that they use to be like, all right, this is the specs of the feature that we're trying to build. So it is everything you need to know to make a thing. Not tutorials, just like specs. So it's useful. The problem is that there's no one format for a design document. So it ceases to be something that's really worth teaching because it's like, well, your studio will have a spec for that. Two is that a lot of studios get away from the concept of a literal design document anymore for several reasons. One, sometimes it's too much work for the game they're working on. Sometimes a series of what are called wireframes, which is simple graphic representations of the UI, is enough. That's what we did when I was working in mobile design. But then also, there's the problem of like nobody's going to read your design document. So sometimes it's like, why am I doing it? So what we've done for bigger projects, though, that can be very handy, is we go on a website like Wikia, and we'll make a wiki, and WikiWa. And it's not to say that that's going to like somehow fix the problem of nobody updating it or nobody reading it, but if you do have these spurts of game design documentation productivity, you actually do have, you can sit down and be like, all right, I'm going to spec out some levels. So... and one of the things, so somebody says one-page design docs are good and cool. Exactly. So that's the other thing is that the idea of a design doc has actually been sort of like boiled down to the idea of the one page. And the one page is really just like, let's put the general high-level stuff on one page it's like really accessible. And that actually is a great segue to what I was going to talk about, which is let's talk about one pages for level design. So that's a design tool. So here we have pages on this wiki for each of our levels for Little Nemo and the Nightmare Fiends. So what does this have? It has a summary, like where in the story do we encounter the level? What is it? Is it level 1? What happens in level 1? What is like the opening cutscene? In general terms. It doesn't have to be like finalized. And you always make these with the understanding you're probably going to change it. Game design documents are living documents. You change, you cut, you add, you get a new collaborator and holy crap, we have all, somebody wrote it. We were able to hire a narrative designer. Our narrative's better. Yay. We can do that kind of stuff. But you might have something like, what are your design goals or your experience goals? So, Night Sky what is the Night Sky level for Little Nemo? Well, it's level 1. Which means that it has basic gameplay tutorial in introduction. You're introducing Nemo's abilities. Nemo being our main character. So it has an intro area with simple platforming. Because it's the first level and it's your like hook. If you've ever played... I think the new God of War has some of it, but new God of War is very like toned down from like God of War 1, 2, and 3. On PlayStation 2 and 3. So if you've ever played the original, like the first 3 God of Wars, this is maybe a better example of this, where there is this thing in level design for certain games where it's like you want level 1 to kind of hook the player. So in the original God of War games, playing that was kind of like, hey, welcome to our game. This is God of War. We hope you really like it. Here's all your powers. Now go fight Poseidon. And then you fight Poseidon and you feel amazing. And then they're like, wasn't that great? Well, we hope you had fun. We're going to take away all of your powers, but like 1 or 2. But now the game has that potential, and now you're going to play the rest. But we'll get you back to god killing. Cool, great, have a good one. That's kind of how first levels work. And what's really nice about that is that, again, that's an experiential goal that you might set for yourself. Like, okay, so we're going to do some wow moments, and that's what we want for this. And then, at some point, like, you'll have some final battle or something. So that's our goals, that we want to hit these beats. Because we're working from intellectual property that already exists, which is a public domain comic, public domain comic strip, we like picked out elements of the comic strip and said, like, okay, this issue and that issue and that issue. So that'll give us like some references, but if there's references, that kind of sounds like the same excuse they used to take Samus's cool weapons away. Give her all her cool weapons to have them stolen in 5 minutes of the game. Yeah, that's like a narrative justification in the Metroid Prime series that's kind of nice that they have for, like, yeah, exactly. Being like, Samus did just become a super armor character in Metroid 1, and you're coming off of Metroid 1, but then oopsie, you lost it. Some games have even gone into, like, we're going to give you an intermediate amount of your abilities from that past game, but then there's new abilities. So that's also a really neat twist on it. But so the point is, and I'm not going to go into each and every aspect of this one sheet, but that's the idea. It's like, okay, we have biomes, so maybe we have, like, what is the environment art that we're going to have, environment art, who are our enemies, you start to list things out. But the point is, you start to plan these things, and then you can get into, what your level actually, what your spaces actually contain. So one way that you can also plan out levels is, like, thinking about the player experience, and that might include, what decisions does a player have to make? So you might do flowcharts for certain areas, like, does player have key? There's a locked door, yes, next room, no, and then here's the sequence. These are kind of micro level, but the nice thing about flowcharts like this, it gets into the idea of mapping out levels in Twine, like we talked about. But it also, this kind of logic is really nice for programmers, because you could have, like, okay, here's the series of if-thens and toggles and the matrix of different variables that we can use to control progression. That can be very helpful. Another high-level thing that's nice to do when you are the level designer is think about adjacency and spaces in very, very general terms. So if you have, like, goals, experience or story beat goals, one way that it's also nice to plan these out is with a molecule diagram. Now, molecule diagrams are based on architectural adjacency diagrams, but the architectural idea of this is that you would maybe take, like, if you're planning a house and, your client says, well, we like to cook, so we want a gourmet kitchen, and we want to have lots of family time, so a family room is nice, and we want easy access to between this space and that space. Those are, like, things that matter to that person, right? And spaces that matter to that person. So what this translates to in terms of building space is, like, so let's look at a kitchen. Somebody who cooks a lot will want a bigger, better kitchen than somebody who is, like, a busy software engineer. No hate to software engineers. I'm just like, somebody who's, like, not if they work for a Silicon Valley startup and they don't cook a lot because they're crunching a lot or something like that, and I'm working in some stereotypes here, but also Silicon Valley is a thing. A kitchen is gonna, like, if you were to make a diagram like this of bubbles, and each bubble is a space in a house, the software engineer's bubble for kitchen is very small, and the family person or the chef's kitchen is very big on your bubble. You're not mapping out a plan of a house. You're just being like, okay, you want these spaces, and I'm going to draw them as big bubbles and small bubbles by level of importance. You can do the same thing for level design. So you can have here, like, let's say we have a level where it's important that a story scene sets up, like, you're escaping from a prison or something, and then you have to get to, like, this base in the distance. Like, so the enemy has locked you up in their prison, but you need to go infiltrate. You need to break out and infiltrate their base. Or maybe that's like the story. You're like undercover, so you pretend to be a prisoner, so you were brought to the prison so that you can infiltrate the base. Whatever it is. So prison, base, those are important in your story, right? Those are big bubbles. And then other things that are, maybe there's like, okay, you want it to be, you don't look back at the prison, you don't want to go back. So you want to encourage that with a level design feature. So maybe it's like, it's a one-way thing. So that one-way area, that's a little bubble. And maybe you like, the sort of bottleneck of like a bridge, action sequence. That's another maybe like, set piece, but it's a smaller bubble because it's not as big in your story. So you have this like level space, right, mapped out. So what you might do is create like a molecule diagram where you make bubbles for each of these spaces that you generally know you want, but you don't like, you're not sitting down with Unreal yet or something like that. And you map them out as molecules. And then you start to describe with arrows and lines the spatial relationships between each. So, sometimes it's nice when you start a level to see your goal in front of you. So like from the prison, I should be able to like see the base. Okay, cool. So we're going to draw a big dashed line. That's really important. And then, the one way down to the path. So that's one way, so we're going to have an arrow line. And then the other ones, maybe we'll have just like lines. But you're starting to describe spatial relationships, and then you can look at those spatial relationships and think, okay, cool. Now I can start making a map of sorts. So that's another way to plan, is like mapping out spatial relationships. Another important thing is metrics. It's super key to level design. And what does metrics mean? It means unit-based measurements of a player avatar and their movements that level designers must plan for. So what does this mean? So we're playing Super Mario Brothers. And Mario jumps... Sorry, neck was a little sore. Mario jumps 10 units from a run. And those units are measured in blocks, which on my graph paper here, graph paper is really important for level design. Actually just saw that the head of the IGDA post today, she was doing some like level design on graph paper, and I was like, yes, good job. Love it. So it's like graph paper. So graph paper can be very useful for this reason. We can start to like say, each block of the graph paper is X number of units. So I really like graph paper. So if we're playing Super Mario Brothers, Mario jumps 10 units wide. So there in World 8.1, there is a gap. There's a challenge where there is a gap that requires 11 units of jumping distance to cross. And this is a very specifically set up for Mario's movement capabilities challenge. Because if you do try to just run and jump over the gap and make it in one jump, it's actually impossible. Because the level designer, probably Takashi Tezuka, is setting you up to have to jump on this little 1 block wide ledge in the middle, setting up this like dexterity challenge. Pretty sure even the original Mario one. Original NES levels, a lot of them, they had actual graph paper that were divided up into one screen chunks. You know what? I was about to say, like, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but I actually can. You know how, for those of you, we're all working in GB Studio. I'm sure you've noticed, like, GB Studio has those, like, 8x8 squares, and you'd plan an 8x8, right? In tiled. That's why the graph paper existed, because it was, like, draw your 8x8, each square was an 8x8 unit, and you'd draw your little tiles in the 8x8 unit. So you'd map out like even down to the environment art level, which level tiles you were using. So yes, this is another reason. So the visual thing, but this is why graph paper is so essential to level design and why it's so widely used. But if you're like, but I want to make 3D games, man. Well, guess what? Metrics work in 3D games too. A Unity unit is equivalent to 1 meter. I know that because I understand metrics. And that's not to say like Unity is the only one. That's the one I know really well off the bat. But, this is from the God of War GDC level design summit talk from several years ago, back when we could have GDC in person. And, they were looking at, like, you had to build your geometry around Kratos's movement capabilities, his metrics. And from that, you squeezed out level design experience. So another aspect of level design is like, how we plan this geometry, even just like in more concrete ways. So we talked about sandboxes or toy boxes, which are these levels that you make that are just like, let's see if my mechanisms work. And then you do these blockouts. So things like Andrew Yoder's Gray Box. So Andrew Yoder is a level designer. He designs mainly multiplayer arena type maps. And he, in his spare time, practices his level design by making Quake maps, like Quake from the 90s. And he makes them, what he's practicing with them is he starts to think about different levels of access and how you get from points of interest to points of interest. So first he starts with like, let's make some points of interest, which in the upper right-hand image are these like bubbles. They are these like colored bubbles. So these are like main platforms or points of interest in the level. These are like main spaces. And then he connects them. He connects them in very normal ways. That's the black lines. But then he starts doing these really interesting things. He starts to really think about what the connectors are. And so there's like a obvious path between some of these. So you see the S's, those are stairs. There's usually like a ramp or something like that. But then you have, maybe there's like an M mover, so something that moves up and down, and maybe that gives you some like a little more skill-based because you've got to do some platforming type of way to get from one place to another. But then he has these like other, so, J. So what's J all about? Well, J is like rocket jumping. Meaning, so it's a skill in a lot of online video games where you use the force exerted by an explosion from a rocket to propel yourself upward over obstacles. And why that's really cool is that you can break the progression of the level. So you can move around really fast if you understand how to do stuff like that. And that's a really interesting way to think about level design and metrics is, and practice. And this is the kind of thing you can do with gray boxing. You can start to plan for different levels of skill. So there's like an A, a B, and a C. So, or like a beginner, intermediate, and expert way to get around levels. And that's, high level play right there. So it's really useful. Other ways that you can more concretely plan your level, even while staying on paper, you can do. So remember that drawing for architecture class you have to take. You can still use that information. There's things like drawing floor plans, of your level, and you can set yourself a key of, how you're going to lay out game objects. So this is from a mobile game I made a number of years ago called Swarm, and we would have a sort of key to like lay out our level spaces. So like anything that was hatched there, that's like raised areas. We'd mark half pipes because it was a sort of like you'd have some skatery physics. We'd put on coins, we'd put on our starting point, we'd put on our traps and our obstacles and things like that. And then that would give us an idea of like how to build. So this was our way of like planning things out. And thinking in units, which were appropriate to the game's character Hot Rod. Because it was one of those like tilt to move mobile games, like mobile platform games. Another way to play with this is to have, so plans are not always perfect though because they don't work in 3 dimensions. So that's why you have sections. Sections are building drawings where, imagine you like cut a building at a point and then you would like move it apart and then look inside the building. That's what a section is. It's like you looking at a cross section of the building. What's nice about sections is that you can start to plan out architectural spatial relationships. So, here we have a classic spatial relationships from a Frank Lloyd Wright house where the person inside the house can look outside, but the person outside the house cannot look at the people inside because of the way that the window and the balcony are positioned. Block certain views from certain perspectives. But that's the kind of thing you want to understand. You're giving somebody a spatial hierarchy. Elevations, pictures of the building from the front or from a side with no perspective. You don't really use those in level design, except maybe as concept art maybe. But you do use these things called axonometrics. And why you use them is that they're a sort of in-between of a section and an elevation, or a section and a plan, where you're looking at, some people call this isometric, but that's actually wrong. You're looking at it from an angle such that you can start to plan out, again, spatial relationships. You want to be able to view those spatial relationships and understand, map out, what's it like when I jump down, when I'm shooting from this balcony, and then when I have to jump down, when can I get cover and things like that. Even if you don't literally map out your level in this way, starting to sketch those relationships can be super helpful. And then perspective, it's concept art. But also sometimes when you draw, you do diagrams. And again, so if I'm mapping out something in axonometric, where I have a character jump down from a balcony at one point, maybe I draw an arrow through my path. Or I draw where I would anticipate monsters coming from and things like that. That's where you start to add diagramming. That's where you start to add information. So you abstract parts of it and draw little indicators for yourself of how things move. So real quick, I'm going to look at, so here's an example from Horizon Zero Dawn, from one of the designers giving Blake Rebausch, I don't know how to pronounce Blake's last name actually, Rebauche maybe, but he, he gave a GDC talk about putting levels together for it. So one of his first assignments was to create this space where the player has to sneak in and attack some guys, right? And the way he created that at first was this very top-down, flat way, and you had to get around things. And that was sent back. His bosses didn't like that, and the reason they didn't like it is because they said it felt like a bad Killzone level, but that was all the feedback they gave. Really what it meant is that it was just kind of flat, and there was no points of interest to it. So what he did is he started playing a ton of Killzone and looking at why were certain spaces good and why were certain spaces bad. So he discovered a few things, and most of them are mainly related to height, which is if you have areas of different levels of height in your platforms, what you ultimately get are choices. You have points where the player can look down on bad guys, or where the bad guys can maybe look down on the player, and you have this spatial relationship that is really meaningful and creates lots of interest. You also have these little places to duck behind objects or in little doorways or things like that. Even the stairway coming in is a really nice area because it's privileged. Nobody's necessarily watching you, but you're coming downstairs, so it's you're higher than everybody else, so you get a look down on the enemy. Those height differences, the ability to sneak into places, things like that, made it more spatially rich and interesting. So that's why we go and use these plan, but also section and axon and things like that. So that's planning. Step 2, implementation. So in levels, we have things called mechanisms, which are environment objects in a game that players can interact with. So traps, buttons, switches, spinning saw blades, that's what these are for. And when you are making them, you make, again, we talked about this, a sandbox or a toy box, which is a level not accessible to players where a developer builds and tests mechanisms. So you build mechanisms. So you build a bunch, they work, hooray. Let's make levels. So one thing to think about when you're making mechanisms your switches, your enemies. Your enemies can kind of be mechanisms. Let me point out that enemies are absolutely part of your level design, because what you want is levels that, if you stick an enemy in a space, that encounter with the enemy should be interesting. It shouldn't be random. It should be just like, oh, I built a space where, if you've ever played Doom 2016, this is like a master class on this type of design, where it's like the first time you meet a monster, it's in X type of space, and then maybe you go to the next level and you see a monster in the same kind of space, and you're like, aha, I know how to beat you now. And then another one shows up and you're like, oh my gosh, 2 of them in the same amount of space. How ratchety, how it's ratcheting up. And then next time maybe you see 2, but it's in a smaller space. Oh no, but you have the BFG. Oh yes, so it scales, it ratchets up in a meaningful arc. You can do that. That's why enemies are part of your level design, so they can be mechanisms. So why is this important? Well, you want to think about multiple ways to use any mechanism to make them interesting. Trying to take down Hammer Brothers as Small Mario is not interesting. It's annoying. Yes, I agree. But think about the Hammer Brothers. That's actually another way that they ratchet those up. So they had that mechanism, and then they had it like, but what if Hammer Brothers but you're on flat ground? What if Hammer Brothers but there's 3 of them, or on long platforms versus narrow platforms? That's a good example. So in Super Meat Boy we have spinning saw blades, but then sometimes they said like, well, what if spinning saw blades but also on spinning sticks? Isn't that really interesting? So now you have like, sometimes the saw blades aren't there and sometimes they are. Time-based access to safe platforming. That's interesting. It's interesting to ratchet up and find new uses or novel uses of a thing, whether that be an enemy or a level object. That's called juicing. Sometimes you want to juice a level mechanic, meaning finding multiple uses for a single mechanism. I'm going to use juicing in another lecture to mean another thing. Be forewarned. They are both accurate uses of the term, because people use them in different ways. This is just the unfortunate part about being in a industry. People have their own terms for things. So, but today we're going to talk about juicing in terms of like finding multiple uses for single level mechanisms. DLC trials in Breath of the Wild sound beat it. Yeah, anytime you download like challenge trials or challenge levels, it's usually where you really see the developers like juicing the mechanics, and like, I hadn't thought about using that in that way before, but now it's like, holy cow. That's a perfect example. And that's why we Greybox, because we want to test this stuff out. We want to play with this stuff. We want to let the creativity flow and try these things out in a trial and error prototyping process, an iterative process. Oh my gosh, this class is like coming together so much. Because, we want to discover what it is our levels do. Crash 4 takes the entire bakery for and then, last but not least, make it pretty. So like you Greybox, you find something cool in your base geometry, then let's dress it up. Let's take it out. It's ready for showtime. That's when you dress up is once it's finally good and done and it has all these things. All right, we're at time. Any questions? That's from the game. Any questions? I have to kind of move it, but any questions? Nope. Oh, when it comes to juicing a game, how far do you think you can take it? To its logical conclusion? Again, like, it really depends on how you lay it out. Like, you can juice as far as you want. You just have to, like, maybe not put that juiced to its absolute limit version in, like, the main path. Maybe that's, like, a point of mastery. So, again, like, speedrunner. You start to extend towards speedrunners and things like that. Like, you know, with Super Metroid or Hollow Knight, things like that. So, yeah. We can talk more about that too, because it does get actually really nuanced. But so I want to talk about it, but I'm gonna have to cut it off here, and then we can continue it on Discord. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. We can continue the discussion on Discord, but other than that, I will talk to you.